everyone. Welcome to Elevate Winter Summit. My name is Balki. I'm a Director of Engineering at Shogun. And today's topic is increasing accountability in remote teams. This topic is really close to my heart because I've been working with remote teams for over 7 years now. And we have an awesome panel of engineering leaders here. Aravinda, Avital, and Andrew, who are here to discuss this topic and share their wisdom. We'll go to intros now, starting with Avital.
Hi, everyone. Avital Aurora. I'm a VP of Engineering at Salesforce. Salesforce has had, of course, now we're all working from home, but we've had distributed teams, remote teams for a long time. And so certainly a big part of our conversations are around how do we make teams successful no matter where they are. At Salesforce, I work as part of Sales Cloud, which, our job is to make salespeople more productive. But Salesforce also does a lot of acquisitions, and with those acquisitions come teams in various places. So, between organic and inorganic growth, we've been growing a lot. We've got a lot of distributed teams. So happy to share what I've learned over the years.
Thank you, Avital. Next up is Aravinda.
Yes, thank you for having me, and welcome everybody to this summit. And so I'm Aravinda. I lead the technology and organization at Sage, especially focusing on Sage Impact. And so as Avital was mentioning, just like, Salesforce, Sage is a company that's actually headquartered in UK and has been around for 40 years. So, and talk about acquisitions, there have been quite a few. We've been adjusting to this world of, shelter in place and remote and managing different time zones and geographical challenges for a while now. So we've done it quite a few times, and we know how to deal with not just dealing with time zones, but also with language barriers, etc. For those of you who don't know much about Sage, Sage is a company that does, ERP and also, workforce planning, HCM solutions for small and medium businesses. And it has offerings, across 26 countries across the world.
Very nice. Thank you, Aravinda. Last but not least, Andrew, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Balki, Avital, and Aravinda. Very, it's a pleasure for me to actually get a chance to join you all here. I'm the co-founder and CEO, although today I think they said CTO here on this one, but I'll be the technology guy for the second. Of a company called Jellyfish. We're a Boston-based company that really specializes in helping engineering leaders like ourselves get visibility into their large teams. Just by background, by the way, I trained as an engineer, previously engineering leader, and now running a company in this space. So I think I'll bring a perspective of seeing both sides of the table around that part of it, from the business and technology side. But more than anything, I'm here to learn, right? I think we have some experts in the room here, and really, I'm a student of this all. So looking forward to trade notes here.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. So without further ado, we'll jump straight in and go straight to the topic. What does accountability exactly mean for you? And we'll start with Aravinda on this question.
Sure. In my opinion, accountability is a commitment or a promise to make a best effort in order to achieve an outcome.
Avital, do you want to add anything there?
Aravinda said it really well, succinctly. I love it. Say what you're going to do and then do it. Keep people informed when things are going well or not well. So part of accountability is also communication, both left, right, upwards, downwards, so that people know what's going on.
Fantastic. And Andrew?
I think accountability is seemingly a simple word, and I think Aravinda just dropped, some definitional knowledge on us on this one. But I think it is a contract, as Aravinda said. But I think part of this is because accountability isn't always so terse and delineated. I think it's about expectation management and alignment around two parties, and that, at the root of it, it is a contract between two parties. But that contract is about getting alignment around that, because we sometimes can't always express it crisply. And so making sure that we're coming across the same expectations, coming at it from the same directions, can help guide us to that point of accountability. So I know that's a nuanced part of it, but I think in the reality of how we actually interact with humans, I think we often have to broaden the definition a little bit, because it's necessary to make sure that the expectations are met on both sides.
Thank you, Andrew. now that I have your attention, Andrew, I have a follow-up question there. So, now that now that we are here to stay for the long term, working remotely, 2 years into the pandemic, do you see accountability from a different lens from before the pandemic?
I absolutely. I mean, I think, look, while we'd all wish the world to snap back in some ways, I think it's been a difficult time for all of us for 2 years here on this. So I say this with deference to all of these things, because they're, whether it's health or equity across the organizations, it's hard. But I think when we talk about work style, this hybrid remote world is actually one thing that's dramatically different for a lot of teams, is that you no longer can rely on those floor walks, those elevator rides, those pizza lunches, right? I think, for a lot of engineering organizations, we kind of crutched on those things for a long time, right? So I probably say this with everybody nodding, or well, duh, Andrew. It's like when you were 10 people, you literally kind of like were in the same room, you kind of knew what was going on. Maybe at 20, you could still kind of flip through their code. Maybe at 40, you walk the floor and you kind of get a pace of like, who's really digging in and those things. And that helped you get a sensibility of what actually was happening. All of a sudden, boom, like spring of 2020, we don't see each other besides this little square here, right? And so we're missing all those other signaling factors that we take on as humans in that space. And so we suddenly are now here to figure out, like, how do we know we're doing the right stuff? How do we know this team is working the same way that I want to see? And or how do I even know who's actually stuck and how do I help them? And we, of course, in this climate, none of us want to be biased either, right? And so I think it's actually forcing a conversation around like, hey, how do we actually figure out that contract, that accountability in this setting? Because we no longer have all these little things that we can rely on. Like as humans, we had all these extra signals we picked up on. And so I think it really is forcing these conversations in a first class way. And then it's still aligning with whatever our culture is for organization, and cultures are changing too. And I use the word culture not lightly. I think, sometimes people think culture is foosball tables. In this case, I actually talk about, the language of accountability is what the culture is here in this case. And it can span many things. So like, yeah, Balki, you definitely touched something I care about. It's changed a lot in the last couple of years. And frankly, I think it's still evolving. So that's why I come here, all of us, and learning and trading notes, because, I don't know if we have the magic answers today.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. That just definitely resonated with me there. Aravinda, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I think I completely resonate to what Andrew just said, and I agree that we're all still learning. But I think he touched upon something that's important, which is we need to be deliberate in our communications now. So we no longer can say, I thought she was clear on the approach, but her face told me otherwise, right? Or like, we are talking about a hallway conversation where, you see the stress in a person, or ability to ask and check in, right? Now these interactions have become extremely deliberate. So that's a totally new way. And underlying all of this is a need for an implicit trust, a need for assuming positive intent in our interactions, because not everybody communicates the same way when you are in a digital world. And so it opened up the need for us to rethink our way we are interacting with our team members in this remote world. And let me tell you, I agree with Andrew. It's a constant learning, and we constantly have to check in and say, did we cover everything? Did we check in? Did we make an attempt? So, because it's important. It's really important to make sure we understand that. And lastly, I will add that we no longer are in a 9-to-5 world. People are blending work and life. So the level of stress people undergo right now is so different than it was before, right? They don't talk about commute anymore, or they don't talk about the challenges they have with weather and stuff. Right now, the challenges that people are facing are vastly different. So it required us to also have empathy in interactions. And again, happy to learn from Avital as well to see what she has to say.
Aravinda, sorry, Avital. I was just gonna say +1 if I could have the emoji on this one, right? Like the empathy part of it is really a big part of it. So sorry, Avital, go please.
No, absolutely, Andrew. The +1 on the empathy. I think that's the number one thing that has emerged, and hopefully we're all, hopefully we don't go back to the old normal, right? Hopefully we, to your point, evolve to a new normal. I'll just say that a lot of these challenges existed pre-pandemic as well, right? I had the biggest realization when somebody who I've worked with for 5 years said to me, it's not, in headquarters, is in a different location, which also has a big office and a site. But this senior person said to me, I feel more a part of this team now than I did in the last 5 years, because everyone is a box on Zoom and not, I'm not missing the hallway conversations. And that was so revealing to me, right? It's like we have actually had distributed teams for a long time, but COVID forced us to actually equalize, right? So my biggest takeaway from this is, I want to be intentional to the points made earlier by Andrew and Aravinda. We're learning, but I also want to be very intentional about not going back to the good old ways of doing things, because they were not all good. And we've got to, so that accountability is on us as leaders to make sure that we are actually learning new ways of making remote teams feel as much a part of our organization as the ones in the headquarters.
Awesome. Thank you, Avital. Andrew, go.
Yeah, I wanted one more here, because I think, I actually want to twist it in a different direction, in the sense that I think all of us, are on the same page here around how we talk to our teams. I think accountability also is one that actually was ambiguous before, and it's still ambiguous today, and I think is worth calling out, which is, we're talking about how your teams work. I think one conversation that actually isn't actually often talked about is the business to the engineering leader, right? And this is one area that I think we should use this as an occasion to bring that accountability up, because often I think there's an unwritten contract that actually happens. Businesses fundamentally believe we're paying these teams to make stuff to actually go so that we can sell our customers or make them use it more and upgrade renewals. And that's an implicit part of a business's expectation of R&D. We were all trained as engineers, and even engineering leaders, as we're worried about the code and perfection and our process and all of these things. And that's a great example where there is a gap around accountability, around what a business implicitly thinks, and what we actually might be naturally thinking based on our training. And I think this is a point where we actually talk about this explicitness now. I think it's a chance for us to really codify and force that conversation as examples of taking advantage of the fact that we all need to make these things more explicit, to do that now in that case.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Avital, I have a question for you. We talked about culture, intent, trust, expectations, lots of things going on there. When you create new teams or reforming new teams, how do you incorporate things like this and also make sure accountability exists for these new teams?
That's a great point, Balki. I've always thought, even more so in our new world, right, that when we create teams remote, the most important thing is having a purpose, a vision, a charter, which is, I'm not creating this remote team just as an extension of this existing team. But this new team that I'm creating, reforming, bringing from other places, this is what this team is going to do, with a plan, right? Not just for the next 3 months, but with a 2 to 3 year plan of, today we are forming this team, but in 3 years, this is what this could look like. Here's the charter they will own, center of excellence. Different companies use different terms for it. But really that team should feel accountability. As much as your leadership can say, hey, you're accountable for this, accountability also comes from within, right? So if a team feels like they have a charter and, this is what they're getting to, their goalpost, right? This is the Everest or Kilimanjaro, whichever it is they're climbing, that accountability, a lot of that automatically happens. So I think giving that team that peak and that, vision of where they're going, to me, is the number one way of increasing accountability.
Fantastic. Andrew or Aravinda, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, so I'd like to add a little bit on rules of engagement. And what I mean by that is, and I think Avital touched upon it before, is we have tolerated a lot of things before. I don't know if you are familiar with the term called the boiling frog syndrome. Mm-hmm. So we have before the whole shelter in place tolerated higher levels of unworkability, right? We didn't actually have this notion of talking about explicit awareness. So it's important that we also talk about it in the sense of calling out clearly what are the rules of engagement, what are these operational objectives that we are all trying to achieve, along with the clear vision and purpose that Avital just talked about. What is me and what is my role and what is my expectation at an individual level, at a team level, at a leadership level, so they all know where is the goalpost. I'm not sure if, Andrew, you have something further to add.
No, I think I'll build on it. I mean, I think this is actually, again, good note taking and me learning here. I think building on both of these, I think we all have roles, right? So you all have teams that themselves have teams that are remote. I think we bring a role into this to actually help suss out this charter, right? So this is a little bit around process. Like I actually have a hard time believing sometimes that a new manager and a new site can actually write the charter down. They might have an idea, is what a job description might have said. But I think as people with more purview and so you can see it across the organization, our job is to actually help suss out the unwritten stuff, right? The expectations that actually are implicit in the organization, or to actually tamp those down. But either way, like the other part of rules of engagement or our practice on this as leaders is to actually help shepherd those things. Because I don't think it's sufficient to say, I will tell you, if it is just to climb Kilimanjaro, then that's great. But it's actually often to climb Kilimanjaro, and while you're doing that, bring up a few buckets of water and also rebuild the house while you're up there. And by the way, don't forget to actually increase your DAUs by like 150%, right? Oops, forgot to tell you. And so our job as people that see across the teams is to actually add those other things out, or to say like, hey guys, they can't build a house while they're doing this. This doesn't work.
What?
Right? So
There's no can't.
That's right. But I think part of this is actually, like, I think this is a great conversation, but I think there's a meta part of this, which is not only do these things have to happen, but we have to help our teams make it happen. Because I think even if we just did these literally, it's not sufficient, because most of the teams often can't see their other stakeholders that are kind of behind the curtain actually implicitly pulling strings on things.
Awesome. Time is flying by. So folks in the audience, keep the questions coming. We have allocated about 10 minutes at the end, so we'll have time to answer your questions. So please keep them coming. I'll ask one more question and give a chance to the panel members to wrap things up from our side, and then we'll switch to the Q&A from audience. So, all this talk about accountability, etc., naturally leads to metrics and measurements for teams as well as individuals. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that topic? Like, how do we measure accountability in the new world?
Look, I think that could be a complicated subject depending on the different cultures of organizations. And again, back to my point of culture, it's not foosball tables. It's how you choose to build things. I think it's really important to actually, at minimum, to look at it from a team perspective on these things. But I think the world metric is, I think, overly generalized. I think it's actually more important, less around the metrics alone, but also what is the totality of accountability for the organization? And it needs to be built with the team, right, on this thing. I think nobody wants something coming out of left field. And we're going to overstretch an analogy being like, how many pounds you're carrying while you climb the mountain. Like, nobody wants to be surprised by that post facto. And I think it's important to work with your teams to figure out what are the things that actually matter to the organization, to this team, and those things, and pin that down early as part of the charter in that case. And often that means, like, first and foremost, to make sure that the team is actually effective in that way. I think when it talks about individuals in that part of it, which I think, Balki, you were alluding to, I think it's I think you have to be careful, right? Frankly, on that, I think it's important, though, to actually make sure that we address individuals to make sure they're supported, though, right? So that's the thing I do want to emphasize, right? As a simple one, right? Like, often you'll find teams where certain individuals just aren't getting their PRs actually reviewed. I know that's like very myopic seeming, but I'm just making something very tangible, which is that engineer, that individual, maybe being held back because they're not being supported, right? And so in that context, it is a team and individual situation where we're actually making sure that, hey, like, we shouldn't be like only reviewing this person's but ignoring this person's. We got to make sure that we're balanced around getting people through the chute, because we operate as a team, as an output. So I think we need to actually look at the team first and then find places of actually helping each other on an individual basis. But all of this comes down to back to the accountability. What's our contract? What are we trying to do here, right? If we're just trying to ship code, that's fine. Like, that's implicitly what we said. But more than that, are we trying to actually go up the mountain? Are we measuring the mountain? How are we actually getting up the mountain? And really having that conversation with the business and the team and making sure that's clear for everybody. almost that the dialogue is almost as important as the contract itself, right? And so to me, like, I don't think those things should be taken in a vacuum. And I find the word metric might be too general to actually take on that part of it. But I think parts of it are part of the equation.
Awesome. Avital and Aravinda, I know this is a passionate topic for both of you. So do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I don't mind actually chiming in because it's honestly an extremely passionate topic for me. Because one of the things that Andrew touched upon is the importance of responsibility, collaboration, and trust, right? As you're actually looking into it, right? A metric, what may mean sense for one team may not be, or one area may not actually be applicable to somebody else. For example, if you are as a leader encouraging things like lines of code or story points as a metric, then sometimes you're actually missing out on something else. So, or number of features delivered. But if the features are not used by a customer, then why did we again race towards that finish line? So it's important for us to really understand the metrics and define them and align on them first. And it's important also to have extreme communication and collaboration because, like Andrew said, PR is stuck. Right? If you don't have that compassion in understanding, why an outcome has not achieved or achieved, not the activity behind it, then I think, you will actually, will not have the team gelling and humming together. So something to think about. And Avital, anything further to add on this?
You have both covered both the qualitative and subjective pieces of this. So I'm happy to go to audience questions.
Okay, cool.
Hey, real quick though, I actually want to want to say something, which is, I think both Aravinda and Avital run very large organizations, and I think as what I've learned in watching different teams is scale is its own art, right, and it's part of it. I think one of the things that we do face though is I think metrics and the accountability and the contracts, like these are all words that are clearly related. At scale, increasingly matter, right, because you can't see everybody every day in this thing. I think sometimes all of us as engineers ourselves can be held back for perfection on these things. And my 2 cents to add to this is we don't need perfection and we don't need all the metrics or all the points of accountability. Start somewhere, right? If there's a shared value in your organization to measure generally like deploys, if you're a very Dora shop, then just start there, right? Or if you're a shop that actually just worried to make sure that we are actually getting PRs through the chute, then just start there. We know that's not the perfect contract, but perfection should not hold you back from actually starting the dialogue, right? And I think part of this is that because the reality, to be frank, is the business and the finance is surviving without any metrics, and they're making gross decisions about you and your team without you, right? When it comes to hiring, headcount, and salaries. So if we don't start the conversation and figure out what the contracts are for these things, then it'll be done for us. And if it's done for us, I promise you it's worse than anything else we can think of.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I know I promised I'll give you time to wrap up, but I think I'd rather jump to Q&A. There's some fantastic questions there. So wrap up your pitches inside those answers. So we'll jump into audience Q&A. The first question is from Giselle. How is accountability or lack thereof rewarded, called out by leaders in an effective manner? Who wants to take a shot there?
I can take that. I always believe in appreciating in public and reprimanding in private. I think calling out things in public, unless you're really trying to make a sample of it. Thanks, Andrew. Unless you're making a sample of it. And sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to make an example of something if something's been repeated, but usually lots of praise in public and one-on-ones or smaller team meetings, conversations about, hey, how might we do this better? This has been my style.
Other thoughts, especially if they're contrarian ideas?
Should definitely reprimand everybody in public.
Positive reinforcement. It's something that we always have to do, and you get more bees with honey, right? You know that. So completely agree with Avital. Praise in public as often and as early as possible.
Yeah, I'll add that it's for me at least. It's much more easier and natural to do that in the remote setting, actually, with Slack and other channels. Like, I find it easier to praise people in public. So I'm definitely enjoying that. Next question is from David. With employees that were hired during the pandemic and have little connection to the company or their coworkers, how would you integrate them successfully so the relationship doesn't feel simply transactional? Fantastic question. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can go because I've been having a lot of colleagues in this world in the last year, and to be honest, I feel very interesting that we actually have to be deliberate to first talk a little chit chat, if it makes sense, just to get to know and share some personal anecdotes so people know each other. Again, as I said, being deliberate was important. And I'll give you a quick example. One of my colleagues who joined during the pandemic, and we have never seen each other. When we met finally, when we were able to allowed to meet, I actually found out he is super tall, and it's such a realization that we talked about all the other things, sports, personal interests, everything else, but we didn't actually realize those little things that we also realize about a person. Again, so it's so important for us to make sure we don't start meetings always with the topic. We give people chance to bond, make sure that there are options for people to connect with each other socially, in whatever means possible, goof off, have fun, because it's important. That personal touch and connection is also important, and even more important in this new world.
I can jump in.
Aravinda, I was just to say, Avital and I are really tall. I just wanted to tell you before.
I'm sure
7 feet tall.
Yeah. I'll add just one quick thing. In addition to everything, Aravinda, plus one to Aravinda, what we've also started is we've always had the buddy system, which was a technical buddy system, right? Bring an engineer on board quickly. Now we've said there's a buddy technical, but there's also a buddy for everything else, which is you just any questions you have, culture, favorite place to eat, whatever around, right? Because it's important, like you can't do that in the office. You can't roll your chair over to somebody and say, hey, where should I go grab lunch? Now you have somebody on Slack that you can just ping for absolutely anything. And I think that's made a big difference in the way the people integrate.
Yeah, I'll bring my +1 sign out again on this, but I think, I think 100% that we have to be intentional about this because it's the serendipity isn't happening. We don't get to figure out in the hallway conversations and what people are on their desks just to learn more about themselves. So whether it be tools like Donut, I don't know if you guys use it, but it's a very structured way to do. Like it's a little, in some ways, silly that we have to have this kind of random Slack date to actually, but it's better than zero because we need to actually talk to people on that stuff. But to Avital's point, I think wherever you can actually add a couple people to a traditionally transactional 2-person meeting, do it, right? So we found, for example, even during interviews, we'll actually add a session where it's just for lunch with a candidate plus 2 people to eat lunch, right? That sounds silly. You're going to sit on Zoom to have lunch, but it actually turns out because the construct of what we all as humans think is lunch, it lets us actually have some room to talk about your lunch and what you're doing and all of these things. To give ourselves the excuse to actually have non-transactional conversations, get to know each other. And then by having a couple people in the room or 3 people in the room, then you actually find some shared sensibility across people. And that's actually how you build that fabric that is the unwritten alignment around what we actually do and how we evaluate things.
Awesome. We have less than 2 minutes left. We'll cover one more question that was addressed specifically for Avital, but also want to remind the audience that some of us from this panel will be in the lounges. So once you exit the main stage, you should be able to find us in the lounges so we can continue the conversation. So thank you, everyone. But one last question for Avital, and that's probably the time we have today. Avital, are there pieces of technology that have been useful to make hybrid remote teams feel more engaged and part of the team? Quality of in-office video conference tools, team building activities that work well?
Lots of them. Andrew called out Donut. We use Slack all the time. We have water cooler channels now. We have channels for cooking ideas, takeout, recipes, restaurants in areas, all kinds of things that make people, just get to know each other and help each other. Team building, we've done so many things online. We play games. We had a cooking session where we had a chef come in and teach us all how to make pasta from scratch. I was really bad at it, but, we've had cocktail making sessions. I mean, literally, you just have to Google these things, and there's so many things available. People will send stuff to your houses, or you buy your own kits. But definitely look around. There's so much going on now.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see some of you in the lounges later. Have a great day.